Welcome back, guys, to the True Sports Physical Therapy Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Ramsey Nijem. He has an unbelievable background. He was the youngest head strength and conditioning coach in the NBA ever with the Sacramento Kings at the age of 25. Started there when he was 23 years old, became the head of their performance at age 25, and then he switched to collegiate athletics. He is the head strength coach of University of Kansas basketball. Obviously has a national championship to his name, but he is an outstanding explainer of all things that are seemingly complex, but does an awesome job of breaking things down, gets to the point, tells you how to rehab your athletes better, how to train your athletes better. We cover force plates, we cover eccentrics, not just eccentrics, fast eccentrics, slow eccentrics, when to plan them, why they're important, how to progress them. And then we open up with how he's able to develop connection with his athletes. It was an awesome conversation. I spoke to Ramsey before the pod for about 20 minutes, after the pod for 20 minutes, because he's so engaging. He's really electric. Do me a favor, share this conversation with anyone who could benefit from it. Always let us know how we're doing here at True Sports. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Ramsey Nijem. Well, and welcome back to the True Sports Physical Therapy Podcast. Dr. Ramsey Nijem, thrilled to have you here, dude. I'm excited to learn from you. Thanks for making time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Okay, well, I hope I don't disappoint. I want to start with what you got going on. A lot of times I bury this, but I'm really excited about some of your offerings. So tell me about Applied Performance Coach Certification, what you got coming up in June, and why we should become Applied Performance Certified.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. I'm not great at the sales stuff, but I can kind of tell you why I started it and what it's become. I've been doing this for 15 years now, and most notably in the NBA, and then now at University of Kansas. And I've just felt like there was, and you'd relate to this, coming up in the game. There, social media wasn't as big as it is now, and obviously, um, it's part of the game. It is what it is, and whether you like it or not, it's here to stay. And if you use it right, there's a ton of benefit to it, obviously. But one of the challenges, I think, especially for kind of young, up and coming, or kind of in their first, I would say anywhere from 2 to 5 years or so in your careers, a lot of people struggle to filter through some of that information. And then, so with a background in kind of research and understanding critical thinking and how to interpret research, apply research, maybe put some context around it, I thought that there may be a space to start sharing that my approach in the field with kind of that lens. And so over COVID, actually, I put together kind of what I would call my quote unquote philosophy of training. And I had, this was back when I was in Sacramento during COVID, and the back of my garage door, I went to Home Depot and I just put a bunch of whiteboard, like I guess sheets up on the garage door. And so I ended up filling up the entire garage door. I don't know, probably like a 10 by 8 space of just how I think about it, trying to connect the dots. And then that turned into, well, how do you break that down into like sharing, right? You can't just share a picture of this. How do you break this down into explaining it? And then that turned into basically 22 modules of training science. And then you realize quickly nobody wants to sit through 22 modules of anything. So you got to start taking some stuff out. So like in the course, there's no nutrition because that's a can of worms that would need, weeks by itself. So really started to just kind of peel back what's really the most important parts of these things, and then launched it. And that was at the end of 2020, we launched the first cohort, and it's just kind of grown ever since, with coaches enjoying it, sharing it. Most of it's organic, like people can apply, coaches can apply, physical therapists can apply, and I would say like 90% of the applications are from people being referred to it, which is great because I'm not good at marketing, I'm not good at sales, so it helps me a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of the origin of it. And inside of it is just literally a curriculum of strength and conditioning science that I think a lot of strength coaches need, physical therapists need, athletic trainers need. And so I try to deliver it in a way that's practical and actually relatable. I think those are the two biggest parts I try to hit because, I always say I'm not smarter than anybody. I literally just came from campus, and there's 25 strength and conditioning professors. We have a well-respected PhD lab there, right? Like I'm not smarter than any of them in this stuff. So I would say like my angle is I actually do this in the trenches with people, no different than you. And so I try to make sure that although I am bringing science, this is science delivered in a coach's format for people on the floor that are working with people every day. We're not in lab coats, and we're not arguing about the nuance of statistics and analytics. It's just like how can I help this athlete rehab? How can I help this athlete jump higher? And so, yeah, I get long-winded because I get excited about it, but that's kind of everything in a nutshell there.
No, that's really awesome, and it makes sense why it's called applied performance, because you're taking that wisdom and applying it to the athlete in front of you. And I think you're right. That is a missing, or that's a big gap in the field of what do we do with all that science and how do we apply it. So, and you might not be good at marketing, but your product speaks for itself. So I'm not surprised that it's taken off. When you talk about like being real world, it brings me to some research I did around this pod. Here's a little quote for you. You tell me if you know who said this. You ready?
Uh,
I had him when he was young. He always connected with the guys. He never pushed too hard. He made the workout inviting. Who said that?
Oh man, I don't know if I'm gonna get this one. Uh, I don't know. I'm blanking on this one.
Okay, he's a Baltimore legend, Rudy Gay. He really loved his time with you.
Yeah, shout out to Rudy then.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Shout out to Baltimore legend for sure. I was just texting him the other day, actually.
One of the better people in pro sports. And his longevity alone, aside from his production, speaks for itself. So tell me about how you connect to these guys, and then we'll get into all the nitty-gritty science.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rudy means something special to my coaching career because I was fortunate to land in the NBA when I was 23 years old as an assistant, and Rudy Gay was on that team in Sacramento. And then I went through the transition of being an assistant for 2 years and then becoming the head strength coach at 25. And a big part of any amount of success that I was able to find early in my career had everything to do with players being willing to give me a chance, being willing to be bought in. And Rudy was every part of that. I mean, literally, when I got the head job, he was so excited for me. He kind of took me under his wing. I remember he came in the office and said, "Hey man, you my rook now." And as you know, like getting that cosign from a guy like Rudy Gay, a veteran, a respected player, a talented player, it just made it so easy. Now all the young guys fell in line because they were like, "Yo, if Rudy rocks with him, I'm gonna rock with him." And so, it meant a ton to have that. So I'm glad you brought that up, man. You can see I'm smiling ear to ear just because Rudy Gay's such a nice human being. But I mean, I think when it comes to building relationships, it's a little bit different. The NBA is such a different space, and professional sports is such a different space than college because in college I'm somewhat of an authority position, right? The guys, for better or worse, have to listen to me, and if they don't, we can create consequences for that, right? Whereas in the NBA, it's not that way. Like they literally don't have to listen to you, and I guess at some level you could find them, but that's not going to help you build the bridge, right? And so you have to find ways to almost become a peer to them. And what helped me in Sacramento early in my career is we had a relatively younger roster. Rudy Gay was one of our older guys, and so I was around the age of some of our guys, and so I would find ways to relate to them through pop culture, through music, through social media, right? Like I would DM players stuff back in 2015, and we would communicate through DMs, before it was even cool. Um, so yeah, I think just trying to find ways to relate to guys. I think fundamentally, even if you can, because it's funny, I'm now at this point where there's more of an age gap. I just turned 33 and I have 20-year-olds. So there's more of an age gap now. But I think the bedrock of all buying is like, do you care about this player? And does the player know that? And I tell them all from the get-go, like right when I get a player, whether it was in the NBA or here, it's you'll never question whether or not I want you to succeed. You may question the means to that end because there's going to be times where you come in late and I put you on a versatile climber and you're not going to be happy. Like, I'm not saying you're going to be happy with me all the time. But what I'm saying is, I can promise you, I want you to succeed because the truth is, it's selfish. Like, if you succeed, I succeed.
Yeah.
And so if you go to the NBA, I'm going to look better. So I always want you to succeed. And so I think guys over time begin to realize, like, oh, damn, this dude really does want my best. And it's not this altruistic approach. Like, no, if we do good, the coaching staff does good, So I think almost leveling the playing field. It's like, nah, dude, I want you to win and I want you to get paid. And I hope we win and we find success too.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And by the way, it's totally applicable to what I do for a living in the private world, where it's you have to develop buy-in. There may or may not be an age gap, but there are no consequences, right? The consequences are
Mhm.
the athlete doesn't get better or they go somewhere else or something like that. But the only thing that's keeping them coming back is one, results, and two, that buy-in. So you've got to figure
For
out a
sure.
way to be the person in front of you to be their best friend. And I think that's a huge takeaway because if you don't do that, it doesn't matter what you know.
Yep, for
So
sure.
so
It,
so I
it's
think that
it's
totally
it's
lands.
actually the same. not to cut you off, to almost double click on it. It's, to me, it is the same. Like, in the private sector, at some level, you have to you sell the client through enjoying their experience and getting results.
Yep.
And in my weight room, I sell the athlete on enjoying coming in and getting results. And if those two continue to align, why wouldn't they want to come in, right? Or why wouldn't they want to come back to your clinics, right? It's like it's literally the same thing. We're all doing sales at some level. It's just we're selling results and experiences.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, it is unique. I think you know this. That is a unique approach in the pro sports sector because too often, I mean, you heard it in that text from Rudy, which is it's rare to have a strength coach that creates an inviting, exciting, comfortable environment. I think we need to see more of that. And I would say the same thing in the private outpatient world. That should be a bedrock. That is a bedrock with what we do. It's clearly a bedrock with what you do. Okay, so if those are the soft skills, let's get into more of the hard science. I want to talk about eccentrics. You discussed the importance of eccentric training in athletic development. Help me, help our audience understand the import of eccentrics.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's, eccentrics are fun to talk about, but and for good reason. And I don't know if they're necessarily more important than other muscle actions, but we so often worry about concentric or how much weight can you lift or how fast can you move. Rarely do we appreciate what's happening on the other side of that. And so, yeah, whether it's deceleration and ACL injury risk, or whether it's just landing from jumping tasks, or whether it's just the repeated nature of athletes that accelerate have to decelerate. And so over time, you get this accumulation of trauma. And if you're not preparing your athletes for that trauma, I mean, I'm not going to say they're going to get hurt, but we shouldn't be relatively surprised when bad things happen, right? It's like if you gave somebody a vehicle that can go 200 miles per hour, you might want to make sure that the brakes work really well as well. So to me, eccentrics are just the brakes. Like I want to build the fastest vehicle I can, but I also want to make sure that every system around that can handle what we're putting into this thing. And so, yeah, to me, eccentrics are just like let's make sure that the brakes work, because I want this athlete to jump high and run fast. But if they can't handle the demands of that or what comes with that, then at times that could end up obviously negative. So yeah, that's how I kind of have always thought about it. And over time we've just implemented that, pretty strategically, but it's definitely emphasis in the programs. Like, we're going to build the brakes before we even worry about the gas. Like, let's make sure that this athlete, we know we're going to get you here, but let's make sure that you can handle it before we get there. And that's kind of my approach.
Okay, makes a ton of sense. How do you program them? Where do you put them in?
Yeah, I mean, we start with tempos in the offseason block zero. Tempos become a huge part of it for a few reasons. To me, tempos are the driver's license of, if I continue with this kind of car analogy, I like to use tempos as the driver's license. I don't use them for long. We use them mainly for about a month, unless a player gets hurt. If a player gets hurt, then to me, in the rehab process, you need to come back around and earn your driver's license again. Because to me, an athlete that's gotten injured by no fault of their own is telling me that for some reason the vehicle couldn't handle it or the driver couldn't handle it. So let's go back and earn the driver's license and then rebuild this vehicle. And so when an athlete gets hurt, we'll come back to tempos, but everyone's going to start with tempos, healthy or not. Block zero for us, our summer block, all of June, we're building tempos, because to me, we're building control. We're spending time in that eccentric capacity. And then we have more confidence and comfort adding load. And so the other nice part about tempos is they force you to actually manage the weight in your hand or on the bar, because you can't take 90% of a load for a 4-second eccentric and a 4-second pause, right? It's just not realistic. And so it forces you into sub-maximal loading. So that's how we build it. And then from there, we go into traditional loading, and then eventually we'll move into some faster eccentrics, where we're going to really crank on kind of that stretch shortening cycle to make sure that the athlete can handle that. And so that's kind of generally the progression. It's kind of slow control. Now let's load it. Let's build capacity with load. And then let's really challenge this thing with velocity. And then on top of all of that is just this kind of overlay of workload, right? Like, are we managing what they're doing in your weight room, on the court, so on and so forth. So that's kind of how I look at kind of the three big rocks of implementing it. It's tempos first, sub max loading to max loading, and then let's crank on the speed a little bit.
I love that. Okay, so and I love that because it's so applicable to my world in the rehab side. When patients come in, 9 out of 10 times, we're starting at block zero or the proverbial block zero, right? So that
Yep.
gives me an awesome framework to work from. Give me more specifics. You mentioned 4 seconds down, 4 second hold. Give me more specifics around how you program it and how you progress that beginning block zero.
Yeah, for sure. The first 2 weeks of block zero is a 4 second hold, 4 second pause, and then just stand up as fast as you can and just repeat. And we either have a metronome or a coach just sitting there counting and counting. And I tell my guys just embrace that pain that's going to come with that, right? And then after 2 weeks of that, as long as guys look good, feel good, they're responding well, soreness isn't through the roof, they're not coming in with limited mobility the next day because they're just so tight from all of that. As long as they're responding well, then we'll move that to a 3 second with a 2 second. So 3 second lower, 2 second pause, and then back up. And then after a month, so come week 5, we feel good about it as long as they've earned kind of that driver's license. Now we take off the tempos. The eccentric is just control, no pause. Let's stand up fast. And now we should be by 5 to 6 weeks in. It's like, okay, this athlete has earned the loading that's coming because by now we're getting into kind of that 80% to 100% range. We'll do that for a few weeks. And then, depending on kind of who it is and what they need, now we might be doing some more kind of accentuated eccentric loading, some fast stretch shortening cycle stuff. Or maybe if it's, someone who's dealing with something, maybe we're going to work in some slow tempos. If it's a kid who's not responding well to maybe the basketball volume, now his patellars are lighting up. He's got a little, it's week 6. He's coming in, ran my left kind of patella tendon pains coming back. Okay, cool. Let's get you on. Let's add tempos back. We'll probably use a leg extension or something for that. And now that just becomes part of the program. So tempos can make their way back in. It's more of a use case specific at that point. But that's kind of how I look at it. So 2 weeks, 4-4. The next 2 weeks, 3-2. After that, you've earned the driver's license. Let's get into 80% or above on loading. And then from there, let's go full stretch shortening cycle. Let's speed this thing up. Let's crank on this. And once we do all that, I feel pretty good about, going into kind of the rest of the program.
Okay, I love that. That gives me a lot to work with. So first of all, where did the 4 seconds come from?
I wouldn't say it necessarily came from anywhere special. It was just it's a fair amount of time that I think forces an athlete to slow down a good amount, but it's not so long that either A, we're only gonna be able to do like 4 or 5 reps because now we're basically sacrificing repetition volume for duration volume. And I think, to be honest, I think sometimes the time under tension, quote unquote, is a little bit overrated as long as we can equate that with repetition. So as long as I'm getting the same amount of time, I would rather probably do it with a few more reps than necessarily doing a 6 or 7 or 8 second eccentric. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but personally, it's like if I know where I'm going, which in our next block is repetitions with load, I would rather get a few more repetitions in with load than sacrifice that for 8 second eccentric. So to me, it's just this kind of nice balance where we got enough time, but we still have a little bit of load. If I crank you down to an 8 second eccentric with a 5 second, 6 second pause, it's like, oh man, we're doing a goblet squat with 40 pounds now. It's just
Yep.
it's further away from where we want to go. And so I figured it's kind of a nice spot. But there's no I don't have any data to necessarily support that. It's just kind of a space that I've found that works pretty well with our guys.
Yeah, I think that's a really good reason. By the way, you make a good point there. Not everything has to live in the world of literature, and some of this is feel, and some of this is just experience that you've accumulated. So I love that answer. I think that makes a lot of sense. When you go from 4 second descent, 4 second pause, you go to 3 and 2, weights
Mhm.
increasing, and by how much?
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Weights increasing. And usually just kind of wherever we left off at, we're just going to add 10 to 20. Our goblet squat is going to basically live with us all the way through there. And then we'll move into a Hatfield squat. Um, and so if you ended, block, the first 2 weeks of block zero with, call it a 60 pound, 70 pound, or 80 pound dumbbell in your hand, then we're probably going to 80, 90, or 100 or above. And then, by the time you're cranking out, a 3 second eccentric with a 2 second pause and standing up, and you could do 8 reps of that with 100 pounds in your hand. It's like, all right, we probably can get over here to this barbell and add a little bit of weight now. And so, yeah, wherever basically, and it's really the same for any changes I make in my programming. It's almost like wherever you ended at, depending on how we've made the change, you're probably just going to add a little bit more from there.
Okay.
But never huge changes. That's a big part of my program is my athletes probably get bored, and that I'm okay with that. I never make drastic changes in the programming. I try to make subtle changes, but if you look up after a month, it's like, oh, I started with a 40 in my hand. I now got 100 in my hand. And I didn't even notice the progression because it was, every week just a little bit.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Define accentuated loading for me.
Yeah, usually just a little bit extra, and you could do that a ton of different ways. Obviously, like weight releasers come to mind. We have some flywheels that we can use that help a ton. But in theory, you know, the literature would define it one way, but I think of accentuate as just how can we how can we create this loading more than what you're actually producing? You can do that with weight releasers, you can do that with flywheels, you can do that with assistance on a flywheel. But at times I could also just drop you off of things. So we'll do things like drop landings, we'll progress that a drop landing into a drop jump, using boxes to slow that progression. But we'll just kind of accentuate it, not in I think the scientific literature form, but for me, it's just how do we emphasize this? It's probably a more accurate term for that. So as we move into the progression, it's like now let's emphasize that eccentric, usually with speed at that point.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for clarifying that. Talk to me about the difference between slow eccentrics, fast eccentrics when you use them
Yep.
and what they're good for.
Yeah, for sure. We kind of covered the slow already, and then the fast just becomes when it's time for us to really try to develop this kind of stretch shortening cycle. That's when we use them a ton, and then a little bit as well when we're trying to get in kind of our speed strength blocks. But for the most part, when I start to when my mind transitions to from traditional strength to speed and power, that's where we're going to start to crank on some fast eccentrics. And we'll do that a ton of different ways, but obviously if we're in a traditional lift, then we'll just make sure that they're moving with some speed. We might put some bands on the bar so that way that's going to pull them down a little bit faster, right? And then if we're not on the traditional lift, if we're doing plyometrics or ballistics, then same thing. We might move from a cue where it's hey, balance your ground contact time with height to eventually quick ground contact time, punch the ground away, get off the ground. Now we're really kind of making sure that they know as soon as I hit the ground, I'm turning this thing around as fast as I can. So that's kind of how we play around with it. Either bands on a traditional lift to really pull them down to that eccentric, or we'll just use ballistics and plyometrics so that they can just fully get going on that and really turning around that kind of transition or amortization period. It's like I don't want this to be yielding. You're not coming to a roundabout and looking both ways. We're gonna come on down fast. We're slamming on the e-brake and then we're turning it around as fast as we can.
Okay. And when are you so for that makes a lot of sense. When from a periodization standpoint are you programming those the fast eccentrics?
Yep. Yeah, they'll make their way I kind of use a vertical integration model. So they'll kind of make their way into the program a little bit in July. And then as the guys come back in the fall, that's when we're really getting going. Cause my goal is not necessarily peak them, because peaking is hard in true team sport where there's a ton of different major events, obviously. But my goal is that they feel really fast, explosive, and poppy as soon as November comes, because we usually start the season with a very big game. Duke or North Carolina or something like that.
A
And then
Maryland, a Maryland.
yep, a Maryland
Okay.
for sure.
Thank
We
you.
didn't play. I actually don't think we played Maryland, but they were very good last year. My
Thank
gosh,
you. I appreciate that, Ramsey.
and the freshman they had, man, he's a problem.
He is a problem. He's gone, but
He's gone though. Yeah,
yeah.
so they have a problem to fill those shoes, although
Yes.
they probably already did in the transfer portal. But yeah, I just want guys to feel explosive and poppy. But like currently in a spring block, I don't care if you feel explosive or poppy. We're not playing any games. And I really don't care through June and July. I don't care about August and September. October, it starts to really be important because obviously November's, coming pretty soon. But really, October is when you start to see a lot of these. You could walk into the weight room in November and you might see guys doing drop jumps and throwing things and, accelerating, decelerating, changing direction versus if you walked into our program in June, you would see 8 dudes on ramps doing goblet squats with 60, 70-pound dumbbells, and you kind of be bored watching it. And it's funny, I actually tell people that because people would sometimes want to come and watch us train. And I'm like, hey, just a heads up, like it's going to look pretty boring. If you want, you can count tempos for us, right? Like it's not
Yeah.
that exciting. So yeah, that's kind of how I think of periodizing that stuff.
Okay. And what happens in season, middle of the season, January, February? What does it look like?
Yeah, at that point, it's really just kind of a sprinkle of everything and just making sure guys feel good. I look at I kind of look at college basketball as a few different seasons. So one season starts basically November through March is the season. The final game is the first Monday of April, national championship game, and we've been fortunate to be there. And we've also, had seasons that end a lot earlier, like this past one. But the goal, essentially, once November hits, is how are we going to cycle through a non-conference schedule where, although every game counts, there's probably a handful of games that are the bigger ones that you gotta be prepared for, right? Because in college basketball, every team schedules their own schedule, so it makes it a little bit easier in that regard. And then conference comes, so you got non-conference and you got conference where all 18 to 20 of your games are just, just wars. And then you got obviously tournament time. And so for me, the way I look at it is I'm still gonna try to make some progress and see things go up into the right through basically all the way up until the new year, like through Christmas time. And then January and February, it's Big 12 basketball, it's conference play, every team's in, and it's just like we're gonna play twice a week and it's gonna be a grueling season. During there, I'm not overly concerned about making guys bigger, faster, stronger, or better. I just want to make sure that they're healthy and feel pretty good when that ball gets tipped. And then come tournament time, it's like, yo, how do we recover to get back to this? How do we recover to get back? Because now we're playing some back to backs and things like that. So,
What do those
um,
lifts look like in during conference play?
yeah, conference play lift is about 45 minutes. We'll have every lift I do is whole body, and you'll have a primary block, a secondary block, and then a kind of third C block that could be based on a million different things. It could be someone's individual needs, it could be a team challenge, or if we're cut on short on time, it might be literally everybody do. I call it partner plate curl, where it's like you grab a 45-pound plate, me and you are partners. I'm gonna get a set of 15 to 20. You get a set of 15 to 20. We'll do 3 sets and get out of here. So that C block has a lot of flexibility based on kind of the context of the day, but primarily in season, you got an A block and a B block whole body. Currently and throughout the off season, you have an A block, a B block, a C block, and then a D block that becomes the flexible block. So you have an extra block of work. We have anywhere from 60 to 70 minutes in the off season, and then come kind of conference time, we have about 45 minutes, and then tournament time,
Is that every
you're
day?
gonna we lift every day that we practice consistently 4, if not 5 times a week.
Okay.
So, and that's the nice part is our lifting is built into the culture of practice. So when we practice, we always lift. It's 100%. We haven't, you know, if- I would say very few times since I've been here have we missed that. If we lose a game or something and we have film scheduled before the lift, then I know that that lift might get canceled, which happens, occasionally because it's like, oh, that film session scheduled for 30 minutes is definitely going to be an hour and a half. There goes my lift. Um, but for the most part, we're going to lift every single day that we practice. And then tournament time, you basically just have an A block with a primary push, a primary pull, or a primary lower push or pull, and then a primary upper push or pull, and then you'll have a core, and then maybe one thing that's specific to you. So if you've been telling me, my adductor's been bugging me, we'll probably get something for that. I know you've been dealing with that patellar tendon pain, you'll get something for that. I know you need to gain some weight, go do some curls. But it's just a block that's about 25 minutes, and then you're getting out. And that's kind of how I cycle through every year at this point.
And is lift before practice or after practice?
Always before. I despise, I'm on record, I despise lifting after practice,
Because
especially mainly just because guys are fried by then,
yeah.
especially in college. In the NBA, it's a lot different because practices don't kill you. Some teams don't even practice anyways. But in college, you practice hard. And after 90 minutes to 2 hours of a hard practice, the last thing you want to hear is me telling you you got 4 sets of 5 on trap bar deadlift. Um,
So that makes sense from a mentality standpoint. Is there any worry or any thought that goes into, I don't want my guys going into practice, which is an unpredictable at times environment, right? Where it's reactionary potentially, and they're exhausted. So they just did a leg lift, and now you're going to ask them to play defense, stop on a dime, change directions. Is there a case to be made to put it after outside of the mentality?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's probably a case to be made.
Just not a good
I
one?
would, yeah, I would say it's probably not a great one because, because to your point, there's consequences either side of this, right? If you put it on the front end, you may be a little bit fatigued going into practice. If you put it on the back end, you're fatigued going into your lift. I would argue that there's more technical proficiency that's probably needed in some of the movement patterns that we're loading, because they're not skilled in these movements relative to what the basketball court, right? They've been doing that their whole life. um the other thing there too is you shouldn't be too fatigued going into practice, because I've progressed you in a way that there is nothing shocking in this program, right? Like, if I was to think how can I really mess a player up, I would probably change loading randomly. I probably would change exercise selection often. I probably would not care about your symptoms coming into the weight room, right? If you tell me that your hamstrings are sore, I probably would not care about those things. And so my approach is just do the opposite of that, right? I load consistently. There's very few changes. I only change exercises every 4 to 6 weeks. And when I make those changes, it's still the same movement pattern. So that's not a huge change. And if you tell me that you're sore or something's wrong, I'm probably going to adjust my loading for that.
Yeah. Okay,
And so
that
to
makes
me,
a
I
lot of
just think of
sense.
handling that way.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's kind of the approach.
makes a lot of sense, and I love how strategically uncreative you are with these movements, right? Like you don't want to be throwing a new exercise at a guy. Now he's got to figure out the motor program for it, right? He's got to learn it. There's no time to adapt to it. He can't master it necessarily, all because you want to get creative, maybe. And by the way, calling all the way back to our original conversation around Rudy, like you still made it an engaging environment. So that doesn't have to happen by being overly creative, over Instagrammable with your exercise selection. So I think that's awesome that you're able to kind of hit both sides of that. That's awesome.
Y-
What you said around the 45-minute lift. I love this piece of the conversation because we live at True Sports in 45-minute blocks. Every patient session is 45 minutes. So if you only have 45 minutes to get something done, just walk me through how you do a warm up, how you make sure that they're prepped and still get enough load to make it worth their time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, every session has some version of what I would call prep package. So something to prepare them for the lift ahead. Sometimes that's 3 to 5 exercises that will literally prepare you for the lift. Sometimes it's 2 to 3 exercises that will prepare you for the lift and your first warm up or 2 warm up sets. Like, I literally before this pod came over from the weight room and had a guy where he had a barbell RDL on his program today. So he did one exercise to prepare him for it. His other exercise to prepare him for a barbell RDL was an empty bar RDL. And so part of your warm up is going to kind of transition you to your primary lift. It depending on the time of the year and depending on what we have going on. Like, currently we don't. Currently we just get right into the strength work. So it's like a short prep block and then the strength block. There may be a longer prep block with a primer block in the middle. That might be some ballistics or something, right? That might be where we introduce some drop landing or snap downs, those types of things. Currently, we don't have that, so we could kind of jump over that, and then you just have kind of your primary work blocks. And now we just get into kind of that same. I think in template. So it's like if we're in the off season versus in season, are we in season 1 non-conference, in season 2 conference, or in season 3, which is tournament? And those all have those templates. And then based on your template, do you have an A and B block? Do you have an A, B, C block? Or maybe you have an A, B, C, D block. And so in a 45 minutes, you're probably going to get a prep package. There may or may not be a primer. If there is, it's 2 exercises. You're getting in and out of that. And then you probably only have an A and a B block. And if we have time, we have 5 minutes left. Everybody get some curls or whatever. And then you're out. And as long as you move with a little bit of pace, we'll be able to get through this whole thing. And if we, there's times where I look up and I'm like, based on how they're moving, they're talking a little bit too much. I had to jump his ass. You pissed me off. Now I got to cut a few things, right? So it's just those real world adjustments that we all have to make. But generally speaking, that's what, when an athlete walks in, that's what they're getting: a prep block, maybe a primer block, depending on where we're at, and then your strength blocks. And then if we have time, then we'll get to, that kind of more flexible block at the end.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense and super helpful. I want to jump to being an NBA guy and now a Division 1 basketball guy. Vertical jump development. I've heard you wax poetic around force plates, around counter movement jumps, how important they are. Just help me understand your approach to vertical jump development. And then also, if you could apply some of that to sports outside of basketball, why that would be so important.
Yeah, for sure. A bit biased, uh, because I think that the force plate is such a powerful tool. In part, I think to answer the question, I think, to me, a counter movement jump is probably the most powerful assessment we can do in any field, any sport. Like, everybody should just do hands on hips counter movement jump if you have force plates. It doesn't, I get that a lot. Well, they're hockey guys. It doesn't matter. they're soccer, they never jump. They're a swimmer. It doesn't matter because we're not actually to me, the counter movement jump is a means to an end. The end is lower body explosiveness or power. So I think everyone should just do that. Now, for me, I actually do worry about improving vertical jump ability, right? And now the nice part about force plates is we really can get into kind of the phases of how a guy jumps. I think of force plates is just as literally a body weight scale on steroids. And rather than only telling you their weight, it's going to tell you their body weight, but also how they jump. How high their jump is kind of like I always think of the image where it's like I don't know, like a little iceberg, but then under the ocean is this whole mountain of information or mountain. And to me, that's the counter movement jump. It's like jump height is the little peak that we all see, but underneath that is so much more. Because the reality is we're gonna reach a point where our athletes aren't gonna jump any higher. I got a ton of them. I got a kid who could jump 44.5 inches high. I don't think he's jumping any higher no matter what I do. But there may be some things I can tease out underneath the water that's like, oh, you know what? Maybe we can get him to do it more efficiently, right? Or maybe we can actually get him to do it with a little bit less range of motion to increase the time that he takes to get off the ground. So as I think through all of that, it's kind of like I just have this really powerful assessment and I might as well use it to really understand my athletes at all levels, not just to improve vertical jump because we do that, but I got a rehab guy I'm dealing with right now. I'm not overly concerned about his vertical jump anymore. I'm more worried about those asymmetries, right? And so I got this. It's a Swiss Army knife tool that you can use to assess whatever you need. I don't even know if I answered that, but that's kind of
Yeah,
how I
no,
think through that.
I think that kind of answers it, but I want to know about the part of the iceberg that's beneath the surface. So, give me the metrics, I guess, that you're looking for on the force plates to know whether this is an efficient jump versus inefficient.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy ones from there. There's a when you think through metrics, that's like always where I get into with coaches and even on podcasts, they'll ask me about that. I always think you got to start with jump height because to me, jump height is a couple things. One, it's something everybody understands. The athlete understands jump height, so like give them that. But it also at some level is going to give you a barometer of their effort. If you know a guy, hands on hips can jump 20 inches, and he just gave you a jump that was 15 inches, it probably doesn't matter what's underneath the water because what's above the water was not high effort. And so you have to start with effort. So to me, I always start with jump height. Now, jump height alone is not enough. A metric that I think sits right next to it is what a lot of people have called jump momentum or what is called jump momentum, which is going to account for their body mass. Because the challenge with jump height is two athletes that weigh, 50 pounds apart probably aren't going to jump the same height. So jump momentum gives us a barometer of, well, how are they moving their body mass? For example, if an athlete was to improve their jump height, but their jump momentum went down, that would tell you that their body weight's probably down. So they're probably jumping higher, not because your program is doing what it's supposed to be doing, but because they've lost 5 to 10 pounds. And it may be, in fact, their jump height went up, but it went at the cost of mass, which is what you were trying to do potentially, right? So um, I think of those two as kind of both above the water. And then under the water, now you're getting things like efficiency. So modified RSI is an easy one to think through, which is just going to compare how fast they jump versus how high they jump. And that's a nice metric to start to appreciate. Well, you jumped the same height, but you did it faster. Modified RSI would go up. So that's a nice number there. And then from there, you can kind of get into what I would call like strategy metrics. So a strategy metric might be like counter movement depth. So maybe an athlete rolls their ankle. This is an easy one to look at. When an athlete rolls an ankle, they don't want to flex through that dorsiflexion, right? There's some swelling, there's some pain, there's discomfort, or there's just maybe some caution, right? Like there's just some inhibition there. Well, the nice thing about counter movement depth is although we can't see what happens at each joint specifically, because force plates only measure forces, if I can tell that you're 30% away from your typical range and I know you rolled your ankle, it's probably going to give me some indication of, okay, his ankle's not ready yet. And then I'm going to jump you in 3 days and in 6 days and in 9 days, and I'm going to watch that range return. And that's probably going to tell me, okay, the ankle's getting where it needs to get, right? Um,
Now, are
so
you seeing you're not seeing range on force plate, are you?
nope. Yeah. No. Well,
Okay.
you'll see counter movement depth or center of mass displacement, but
Okay.
not joint by joint range. Correct. Um, and so it's a proxy to that, but it's a nice proxy because it's a lot easier to put an athlete on a force plate and jump than it is to put motion capture on them,
Yep.
right? Like that, the only way you can get dynamic range would be with some type of motion capture, um, or video analysis, which is it's still motion capture, but it's not invasive. So those two come to mind, and then from there you kind of get into the weeds a little bit, which to me are like the phase specific metrics. So now we're getting to like whether it's total time to take off or maybe the time of the kind of eccentric or braking portion versus the propulsive portion. What happens at we talked earlier about stretch shortening cycle and the amortization period. We can look
Hmm.
at that on a counter movement jump and force plates. There's a metric called force at zero velocity, which tells us how much force is occurring when the athlete reaches zero velocity at the bottom of that counter movement. So as they go to squat down to jump, there's a brief moment where they don't move at all. And that's the moment where they're moving from downward to upward. How much force is occurring there? That might tell us something. Um, so yeah, I mean, you can kind of get into the weeds once you unpack that. But to me, it's like jump momentum and jump height are important. Underneath that, you probably want modified RSI, maybe center of mass displacement, maybe time to take off, which is how long this is taking. And then you go one step further, and now it's like, all right, let's kind of nerd out with the phases and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, time to take off is interesting, right? It's their ability to change direction from their deceleration to acceleration, right? Was that right?
Well, time to take off will be the total time from when they initiate downward to the toe being off in jump height.
Okay.
So
Okay.
how long did it take them to jump?
Yeah. How long did it take him to get back up?
Yep.
Okay. So that I see that as a major sticking point for a lot of athletes. I think that really shows up when you talk about how quick an athlete is on the field, even if you're talking about a field sport. I think that's a great metric to look at that. How do you train that to make it better?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, things like the stretch shortening cycle come to mind. To me, I always think in decision trees. So it's like that decision tree. So if the question is like, how do we train that? The decision tree probably goes down to like which parts of this aren't fast enough. Is it the braking portion that's taking too long, or is it the propulsive portion that's taking too long, or are they both equally slow?
Yep.
All right. And so if it's braking, we probably want to do some more kind of goes back to accentuated eccentric, something that requires them to break, right? Snap down, some drop catches, things that require the athlete or person to pull that e-brake and stop.
Hmm.
That's going to help with the braking stuff. If it's the propulsive stuff, it's probably more plyometric based. It's probably more like even concentric only stuff. So think of like I have an athlete now, I'm working on this, and I sit him on a bench and I tell him jump up on the box. But there's no way for you to have an eccentric because you're sitting down. You can't go any lower, right? There's so we'll remove that portion. I just want the concentric or propulsion part so we can tease those out. And then if it's someone who needs both, that's when things like literally, it's funny. A recent research paper came out, and they compared counter movement jumps body weight, counter movement jumps with band resistance, counter movement jumps with band assistance, and counter movement jumps with a weight vest. So you had four different versions, and they found that counter movement jumps with body weight were actually equally effective to the other three conditions, with the caveat being that the band assistance and band resistance were only 10% band assistance and resistance. So it wasn't a ton.
Hmm.
So so my takeaway is, oftentimes you'll see people do this stuff with resistant jumping, but they're not even using a ton of load. It's like some little bands. It's like, if you're going to do that, just do body weight. So surprisingly, if you want to improve an athlete's ability to jump faster, you probably could just have them jump more. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's a ton I threw at you there, but that's how I
No,
think
but
through it.
that last piece is interesting, and I'm a baseball guy, so I'm always thinking about like how does this apply to the mound, right? I I think it's different there. Like you make a great point with jumping that if you just jump more in that instance, you're going to jump better. I would say that's not true with throwing velocity, right? We see it go the other way. So,
Mhm.
what do you think makes up that difference? Why are those examples different?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that jumps out probably immediately is if you jump. The reason why jumping more will help you jump higher is because it's skill acquisition. You're learning that exact movement. Whereas in pitching, jumping more won't help you throw faster, or even pitching more maybe won't help you pitch faster at some level because maybe that skill acquisition has already occurred. If you're a pitcher, you've been pitching since you were 10 years old, probably, and you pitch a ton. Whereas, it's funny when you say that out loud, a listener might say, well, if you're a basketball player, you've been jumping since you were 10.
Yep.
Yes, but you haven't actually been jumping as high as you can, as frequent as you can. That's I think a big thing that even basketball strength coaches will say, "Well, we jump all the time." It's like, well, you do, but you don't actually hit 90% efforts. Nobody goes out on the mound and spends, basketball is literally like 98% of the time is sub maximal stuff. It's very rare that someone go and jump as high as they can. Whereas a pitcher, they're gonna get those reps in a lot more. So I think that part is maybe skill acquisition. Um, but
It's an
there's
interesting way to
probably
think about it.
yeah, and I mean I'm just kind of talking shop at this point, but that's what comes to mind. But they've done some really cool stuff even with baseball. I think of like that front side breaking leg and how that could be impacted. So force plates even could show you some of that, right? Like how does a good pitcher versus a bad pitcher break within a counter movement jump? I'm sure there's something there. I haven't looked into it, but that stuff's probably out there.
There's a huge amount there, and it's very correlative how well that front side limb is working to decelerate, and the way it acts as as a cantilever to propel you forward. It's
Yep.
really fascinating stuff. Okay, but great points, and amazing to like think about the differences there and how often someone is doing something. I think that's a huge misconception that we have around basketball players is that they're constantly at max efforts. And you saying that like 90, 95% of the game is not there is a great highlight, and kind of
Yeah,
something to
and
think through.
yeah, and not to cut you off, but because just so I don't forget, here's a good example for people to think through. The rim is only 10 feet. I have guys that can touch 12.6
It's
if
not
you
fair.
let them,
It's not fair.
right? Like it's like so for him, dunking the basketball is actually never a max effort. Right? And so
Yep.
the rim is probably maybe that's even more to the point of baseball. There is no limiting factor. In basketball, the rim is 10 feet. In baseball, you want to throw as hard as you can, right?
Yep.
So there's no governor of effort, I guess. Whereas in basketball, shit, you're only gonna jump as high as you need to catch the ball, get the rebound, or dunk an alley oop or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Really interesting to think about. You mentioned about jump efficiency. That definitely exists in the baseball world. How efficient is one's motion? And to break down the throwing motion, to look at the sequencing that transpires and the rotational forces that go from toe to ankle all the way up the chain, right? Ending with the arm. Something similar transpires with a counter movement jump or with a jump. Can you walk me through an efficient jump pattern and how you train those?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, very similar, right? I just think of like this idea of energy leak, no different than in baseball, right? It's like we're gonna we're gonna start with these raw materials, and by the time you get to either releasing a ball and pitching, or releasing your body from the ground, right? That toe off moment, it's like how much energy leaked out of this thing. And the nice part is you kind of can look at some of this stuff. You can look at the difference between somebody's peak force in a counter movement jump to their time at toe off, right? Like there may be huge discrepancies there. The things that come to mind though, as far as like making someone an efficient jumper, really a few things. I mean, I think of center of mass. So is it an approach or is it standing? How does the center of mass approach that? You have, if it's an approach, now you have a penultimate step. Then you have a kind of lever step, no different than in pitching, right? You're gonna have a breaking leg and you're gonna have to try to whip around and throw a ball. Jumping is kind of similar. It's like you're going to actually have a penultimate step. That last step is going to be a whip. How can we transfer horizontal acceleration? Basically, hit a wall to shoot that straight up on that kind of lever. Timing of the arms come to mind. And then I think ultimately, too, like that stretch shortening cycle efficiency. Like maybe they come in with a ton of gas, they have good mechanics, but their stretch shortening cycle is just not giving them a return on that energy or that elastic storage. And so you kind of can peel back the layers on each of those and try to figure out which one is the one you want to spend time working on. Relatively low hanging fruit, oftentimes for I think unskilled jumpers, is within your training, just looking at stretch shortening cycle, giving them more practice just to work on that stuff. Not even a ton of cues, just like go jump more, go jump more. I have a kid right now, actually, I'm working on. And after the lift, I gave him a basketball drill where it literally was like, yo, I need 3 sets of 3 layups from the left and the right, but each layup needs to be you literally touching the rim on the layup. And it's just, I just want efforts and practice in a mindset of I'm jumping high. But all those come to mind basically, like what's happening with the center of mass, what's happening with the arms, and then what's happening from a physiological stretch shortening cycle perspective.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I love the way you break it down. To close out here, we just spent a couple minutes talking about force plates. I love the way you simplify them because I think that is the number one issue when we're putting force plates in every sports PT setting. We as sports PTs don't know how the hell to use them. So dumbing it down and getting really good at the basics is really important. What about my clinics that don't have force plates? How do we go about this assessment? How would you recommend it?
Yeah, for sure. There's some cheap apps out there you can get. You can get jump mats. You can get, contact mats or laser contacts. There's a ton of options out there. And then literally, if you don't want any technology, you probably could just get a Vertec. I mean, something as simple as looking at the difference between a squat jump versus a counter movement jump is going to give you insight into their elastic utilization ability. And that literally actually is free because I guess in theory you can use like tape and slap it on the wall.
Yep.
But for a
Been
few
there.
$100s, you can get a Vertec. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, never let technology limit your coaching or your practice. Right. Like, to me, technology should always be supplemental and bolster what we do. It shouldn't be like you're necessarily your go-to. Now, if you're in a position where you have the stuff, use it to its full capability. But you can get anybody back with a dang table and some weights, right? Like, but force plates, to me, and to your point, so often they are almost intimidating because people make them to be way more complicated than they have to be. And I get it if you're trying to sell, and now I'm the guy with a course that's like talking about it, but it's like making things confusing has a ton of benefit because now you feel like you need to learn from me. Whereas my approach is like, I want to make this so simple that you feel like, wow, I don't know why I was ever scared of that thing. Like, so hopefully, if as we talk through metrics or something like that, it's just like start with a few and don't worry about the rest. There's over 80 metrics you can get from a counter movement jump. You can do really well with like 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah, yeah, and you made that point really well. Like when we were talking about what's below sea level, if you just know 3 or 4 metrics that you're going after, and then more importantly, what do I do about these metrics? How do I manipulate them with my programming? Man, sky's the limit. So I think that's really well said. Okay, let's close out with a lightning round. Ready?
Yep, let's do it.
Best athlete you've ever worked with, not named Rudy Gay,
Oh, I'm gonna go with Ochai Agbaji, who played for me at the University of Kansas, and in the NBA, I'm gonna go with De'Aaron Fox.
because
De'Aaron Fox is a freak, probably the fastest mover I've ever seen, and he's light as a feather, which makes it more impressive. I've watched him. I mean, if you watch his game, you'll see him move. But I've also simultaneously watched him. I think he was 180 pounds, pull 425 in a deadlift, and then do a backflip right after. So
come
yeah, he's
on.
a freak of freaks.
Ugh. Okay, give me a book you're in the middle of that you love.
Oh, Deep Work was the last one that I read, which I enjoyed. And Unreasonable Hospitality is another one that blew me away.
Because
Neither of those are S&C books, but both of those are, I think, life books that help us become better coaches.
unreasonable hospitality is something that myself and some of the leaders here at True Sports have been through. It was eye opening to me. Tell me about it. What changed? What it did that changed your life?
Eye opening is probably the best way to say it. One, it's interesting just because I don't know anything about restaurant business and to learn what goes on for that. But I think more importantly, the systems that they created to allow amazing experiences to be created. And it made me appreciate that having systems actually gives you way more flexibility to do amazing things for people. Um, so I would say those. But now when I go to nice restaurants, it's like I see things. I mean, from the book when they talk about every turn they stayed on one side so no one ran into each other. Another one that always resonated was um, how they came up with basically like first base coaching cues for the water that was having to get out fast enough, and how they were like little things like that. It's like, man, you guys really cared about this experience. Now I think we can also apply that. No, it's probably why you guys read it, right? Like I think through that with our guys, like how can I make this just a little bit better? I'm not nothing to that level, but just other little things we can do here and there.
Yeah, and it's a systems approach, right? Like it's like coming up with something that works and applying it across a system. That's something that we do here where we want your experience in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, Hummelstown, Pennsylvania. We want it to look like Baltimore County. We want it to look like Delaware. We want it all to feel the same and still give the ability for the therapist to be creative. So your therapy might not be the same, but the experience should be
Mhm.
similar. And let's figure out what works, what resonates, what doesn't, and how do we quickly pivot away from those things. Those are some of the things that I took away from that book. Deep work, you said, is
Yep,
important.
deep work.
Is important? Why? And by the way, my buddy wrote a almost like a sequel to Deep Work about
Okay.
quitting the smartphone and how to do it. But tell me about what worked with deep work.
Oh, I love that. And I have some research on quitting the smartphone. I just read a paper on. It's quick tangent on it. I just read a paper where they took a group of people, the same group of people, 2 different cases. It was crossover design. where they allowed your cell phone to have Wi-Fi or internet access for, don't quote me on the timeline, maybe 4 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. And then there was a washout period, and then they did it again, but this time you were allowed to have Wi-Fi. So one case where you had Wi-Fi, one case where you didn't. And they measured well-being and stress and anxiety. And when your phone has access to the internet, it just kills you. It just does, like, period. So deep work though to me is nice because it is the anti social media, anti I need to make an announcement it is. And I think about this a lot with learning, like everybody wants to learn quick, and this is why social media is great. Like, I get it. But if you really want to learn something, it is very hard. Like, it's going to take you some time. I read a ton of research. I have a newsletter where I write these research reviews, and it's like that one newsletter happened because I spent at minimum 2 hours reading that paper and trying to digest it. And it's just like, I think to me, deep work was probably confirmation bias of knowledge and learning, and exciting things take a lot of time, and social media is not going to get you there. So, yeah, that's why I enjoyed it. It was probably a little confirmation bias. Like, I would love to go and rent a cabin in the woods for a month and just work on something. Like, to me, that's really cool.
Yeah, that is awesome. Like on the personal side, I'm blessed that I was born into this Orthodox Jewish world. So we don't use electricity for 25 hours every single week on Saturdays. And at, high school, that was a curse to me. And now it's like, it's bananas. It's bananas, like what I feel like in the middle of a Saturday versus a Tuesday. So there's something there. Now there's a huge amount of literature on it, what it does to our psyche, having that phone in front of you. At the same time, like for the 6 days a week that I'm working, it's insane. Like that phone is glued in
Yeah.
front of my face, but there's a lot of gold there. Dude, you have been an absolute pleasure. Ramsey, tell everyone how to find you, how they can get to your course, etc.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at dr.ramsey.nijem. And then the website's appliedperformance.co. I actually just revamped that mainly because I wanted a nice blog to put all these research reviews. So there's currently, I've written 140 research reviews over the past year and 3-4 months, I guess. So I'm slowly moving those over there. I got like 40 over. It takes me some time to copy and paste them.
It's a lot of
And
deep
then
work.
yeah, it's a lot of deep work. My girlfriend's not a huge fan of it, but I've enjoyed it. And then appliedperformancecoach.com is that certification there. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay, guys, please go check out Ramsey Nijem. He is a wealth of information, and the way you approach information, the way you deliver information, just how humble you are, it is refreshing. Rudy Gay was on the freaking money when he said you're great at connecting. Thanks for being great at what you do. We're going to do this again soon, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, I enjoy this. This energized me. I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. That's high praise, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Let us know what you loved. Let us know what you hated. Shoot me a DM, True Sports PT on Instagram.